It was 11:47 at night, and I was sitting alone in a hospital waiting room in Halifax, still wearing the clothes I'd thrown on when the ambulance called. Not when I called the ambulance. When the ambulance called me. My husband had collapsed at work. A cardiac event, they said over the phone, which is the kind of phrase that means everything and nothing at the same time. I drove 40 minutes through a February snowstorm with my hands shaking so hard I had to keep pressing them flat against the steering wheel just to feel like I was in control of something. Anything. When I got there, they told me he was stable, that they were running tests, that it could be hours. So I sat down in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights that hummed like they were exhausted too, and I did what I think most people do when they don't know what else to do. I picked up my phone and I opened the family group chat. My husband's family. 14 people. The chat was called the Hargrove Crew, with a little maple leaf emoji his mom had added back in 2019 and never changed. I typed, "Marcus is in the hospital. Cardiac event. He's stable, but they're running tests. I'm at the QE2 in Halifax. Please pray." I put my phone down. I looked at the door that led back to wherever my husband was. I thought about the fact that we had a 7-year-old at home with a babysitter who had school in the morning, and that I didn't know when I was going home, and that I hadn't eaten since lunch, and that the vending machine down the hall only had Doritos and a kind of granola bar I'd never heard of. My phone lit up. It was my mother-in-law. A single message. "Oh no, keeping you both in our thoughts. Home crush." Then nothing for 20 minutes. Then my husband's older sister sent a GIF. One of those candle-flickering prayer GIFs that churches use to post on Facebook. No words, just the GIF. Then the chat went quiet. I sat there until 2 a.m. I watched the little seen indicators appear one by one next to my message. 12 of the 14 had read it. No one came. No one called. One of his cousins, who I knew was about a 20-minute drive away, sent a thumbs up at 1017 in the morning and then, I assume, went back to sleep. A thumbs up. I remember staring at it for a long time. Not because it was cruel on the surface. It wasn't. It was just a thumbs up. It was the kind of thing you send to confirm you received a package. And that's when I understood, in a way I hadn't before, that to most of his family I was a package notification. Something to acknowledge. Not something to show up for. Marcus came home 4 days later with a new medication and a referral to a cardiologist and strict instructions to rest. I didn't tell him about the group chat. He was recovering. He didn't need to carry that yet. What I didn't know was that while I was sitting alone in that waiting room, something else had already started. And it had started with his aunt. Her name was Patricia, though she went by Pat, which always felt deliberate. Like she'd chosen the name most likely to make you feel like you were talking to someone reasonable. She was in her late 50s, well-connected in the kind of social circles that involved charity galas and golf tournaments named after local business people. She sat on the board of 2 foundations in the city, one of which actually partnered with the hospital where Marcus had been treated. She liked to be seen as the family anchor, the one who kept things together. She had read my message at 11:52 p.m. I know because of the timestamp. She had not responded. What she had done, I would only find out later, was send a separate private message to several family members. I don't know the exact wording. What I was told, second-hand and then third-hand, was that she suggested I was prone to dramatics. That Marcus's episode had been minor, which, to be fair, it had been, compared to what it could have been, and that I had alarmed everyone unnecessarily. That the way I'd written the message was manipulative. That I was always making things about myself. I didn't know any of this for weeks. What I noticed was that the calls I'd gotten before, the small ones, his mom checking in on our daughter, his cousin texting to make plans, his sister's occasional voice messages about nothing in particular, they slowed down and then stopped. The family group chat, which had been reasonably active before, went almost silent when I posted. When I shared a photo of Marcus at his follow-up appointment, visibly better, smiling, holding a coffee, 4 people liked it. Before, a photo like that would have gotten 20 responses. I thought I was imagining it. Grief does strange things to your perception, And I had been scared, really scared, in a way I hadn't been in years, and maybe I was reading distance into ordinary silence. Then Marcus's brother called. His name is Felix, younger than Marcus by 3 years, works in communications for a provincial ministry, which means he's professionally good at understanding how information moves. He called me on a Tuesday evening when Marcus was at his cardiac rehab session, and the first thing he said was, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I said, "Okay." He said, "Did something happen between you and Pat?" I told him no. I told him the truth, that I hadn't spoken to Pat since a Christmas dinner 4 months earlier, and that nothing had happened then, at least not that I was aware of. There was a pause. Then he said, "She's been telling people you had some kind of breakdown in the hospital, that you called the family in a panic and were hysterical, and that Marcus's situation was being exaggerated. She told Mom that you've been under a lot of stress and that she's worried about your mental health." I sat down on the kitchen floor. I don't know why the floor. It's just where I ended up. "She what?" "I've been hearing it from 3 different people," Felix said. I didn't want to believe it, but it keeps coming up. "She apparently told Aunt Denise that you've been struggling since Marcus got sick, and that maybe the family should give you space to process things rather than," and I'm quoting here, "enabling the attention-seeking." I didn't say anything for a moment. I was trying to locate something solid to hold on to inside my own chest. I sent one message. I said he was in the hospital. I said he was stable. I asked people to pray. "I know," Felix said. "I saw it. That's it. That's the whole thing." I sat there alone until 2 in the morning and no one came, and I went home and I didn't say a single word about it to anyone. "I know," he said again. And then, "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry I didn't come." We talked for a long time that night. Felix told me he'd started noticing something was off when his mom made a comment about giving me space that felt strange in context. He'd asked a few careful questions and had started to piece together what Pat had been doing. He wasn't sure of everything yet, but he was sure enough to call me. I told him not to say anything to Marcus yet. Marcus was still recovering. His cardiologist had told us clearly that stress was a significant risk factor, and that we needed to protect his environment while he rebuilt. I wasn't going to bring this into our house and put it in front of him, so I carried it alone for a while. What I did, quietly, was start documenting. The original message I'd sent was still there, time-stamped, with the read receipts. I went back through every interaction I'd had with Pat in the past year, her messages to me, mine to her, any threads where she'd been copied. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for clarity. I wanted to know if I'd missed something, if I'd done something that could have given her a reason, however unjust, to start this. I hadn't. The messages between us were ordinary. Logistics, pleasantries, the occasional shared photo of Marcus or our daughter. There was nothing there. Felix, meanwhile, was doing what he was good at. He was talking to people, not confrontationally. He was too careful for that, but he was asking questions and listening to the answers, and slowly building a picture of how far Pat's version of events had spread, and who believed it, and who had doubts. What he found was that most of the family hadn't thought too critically about what she'd told them. They'd heard it from someone they trusted, in a casual context, without any reason to question it. Families are like that. Information travels in a specific direction, and mostly people just receive it. A few of them, when Felix pushed a little, admitted they'd never actually spoken to me directly about any of it. The one who surprised him was Marcus's mom. She had heard Pat's version, yes. But she told Felix something that stopped him. She said she'd felt guilty ever since that night. That she'd read my message and thought she should drive down and hadn't, and that Pat's explanation had been almost a relief, a way of retroactively making her own inaction feel more justified. And she was ashamed of that. She said that out loud, which took something. Felix brought all of this to me about 5 weeks after that first phone call. He'd been thorough. He had a clear picture of the timeline, of who had said what to whom, of the shape of what Pat had built. He had, in his quiet, systematic way, done actual work. We decided it was time to have a conversation as a family. Marcus was well enough by then. His last cardiology appointment had gone well, his numbers were improving, and we'd talked carefully, honestly, about everything that had been happening. He wasn't surprised about Pat, not entirely. He knew her in a way I was still learning to. What he was, genuinely, was angry and sad, and very clear that he wanted to be present for whatever came next. Felix set up a video call with Marcus's immediate family, his parents, his sister, two cousins who had been particularly close to Pat's version of events. Pat was on the call, too. Felix had told her it was a family check-in after Marcus's health update, which was not entirely untrue. I'm not going to pretend it was a dramatic confrontation with a single moment of revelation. Real life doesn't work that way. What it was Felix, calm and prepared, walking through what he knew. He had screenshots of the original message I'd sent. He had the timestamps showing when people had read it and what they had responded. He had notes from his conversations with family members, which he'd been transparent about. He'd told people he was talking to others. He laid out, simply and without embellishment, the difference between what had actually happened and what people had been told had happened. Pat tried to reframe it twice. The first time she said she'd only been worried about me, that she'd been trying to protect the family from unnecessary anxiety. Felix asked her, politely, to explain how telling people I'd had a breakdown was a form of protection. She didn't have a good answer for that. The second time she suggested that Felix was misremembering or mischaracterizing conversations. His mother, who had been quiet, said, "Patricia, I told Felix what you said to me. He's not mischaracterizing anything." The call went quiet for a moment. What happened wasn't a movie ending. Pat didn't crumble or confess or apologize in any meaningful way. She got defensive, and then she got quiet, and then she said she needed to get off the call. And she left. But the rest of the family stayed on. Marcus's mom cried. Not dramatically, just the kind of quiet crying that comes when you've been holding something for a long time. She told me she was sorry she hadn't come to the hospital. She told me she'd been wrong to accept a story that made her feel better about her own absence, without ever asking me if it was true. His sister said something I've thought about since. I think I wanted it to be complicated so I didn't have to feel bad about a simple thing. The simple thing was that you needed someone, and none of us came. A few weeks later, Pat called me. I don't know exactly what she expected. She didn't apologize, not really. She said something about how things had gotten out of hand and how she hoped we could put it behind us. She mentioned, almost in passing, that she wanted to make a contribution to our daughter's Respirite, a registered education savings plan, as a gesture of goodwill. I told her I appreciated the call. I told her we weren't accepting the contribution. She seemed genuinely surprised by that, like the offer had been the resolution and I'd rejected the script. But I didn't want a financial gesture that would give her a foothold in my daughter's future. I didn't want something that could be reframed later as generosity, as evidence that things were fine, as a reason I'd be obligated to soften my memory of what she'd done. I didn't want to owe her anything. Not even the debt of a gift. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Our daughter was doing homework at the other end of the table, her sneakers squeaking against the chair run the way they always do when she's concentrating. Marcus was in the living room. The light was coming in through the back window at that angle it gets in late April in Nova Scotia, low and golden and a little tentative, like it's still surprised it made it through winter. I thought about that night in the waiting room, the plastic chair, the humming lights, the read receipts ticking up one by one, the granola bar I'd eventually bought at 1 a.m. because I had to eat something, and the way I'd sat there eating it in the silence and thought, this is what I am to these people. A notification. I don't think about it with bitterness now. That surprised me, honestly. I thought I'd carry more anger. What I carry instead is clarity about who showed up and who didn't, and what the difference between those two things tells you about a person. Felix showed up. He didn't show up that night in the hospital. He told me later that he'd seen my message, thought about going, decided it was probably fine, and gone to sleep. He's been honest about that, and I believe him, and I've forgiven it. What he did was show up later when it was harder and less obvious and required actual effort. He showed up with his whole careful brain and his willingness to make things awkward in service of what was true. Marcus's mom showed up too, in her way. Not perfectly. But she told the truth when it mattered. I don't think Pat is a villain in the storybook sense. I think she's someone who needed a certain kind of position within her family and felt it threatened by something she couldn't control, and she made choices to protect that position that hurt someone who was already alone in a waiting room at midnight. I think she didn't expect anyone to check. I think she was used to information staying where she put it. She wasn't at our daughter's birthday in June. She hasn't been back in the family group chat, which still exists, but has a different feeling now, more honest, somehow, or at least more careful. The chat is still called the Hargrove Crew. His mom never changed the maple leaf emoji. I think about how I sent that message expecting something I didn't get, expecting someone to drive through the snow because that's what family means, or what it's supposed to mean. I don't regret sending it. I needed to know. You don't really know who people are until something breaks. Not the big operatic breaks, the ones you can see coming and prepare for, the small, ordinary breaks, the 11:47 p.m. messages, the read receipts, the moment when showing up would have been inconvenient. That's where you find out. And the thing about finding out, even when the answer hurts, is that you don't have to wonder anymore. I keep coming back to the granola bar. That's the detail I can't shake. Sitting alone at midnight under those humming lights, eating something I'd never heard of because I had to put something in my body, and thinking, this is fine. I can do this. I just have to get through tonight. I didn't know yet what Pat had already set in motion. I didn't know the story she was building while I was sitting there. I only knew that 14 people had read my message, and 11 of them had done nothing, and I was trying very hard not to make that mean something. Here's what I've come to understand. The way Pat behaved wasn't random. It had a logic to it. She needed to occupy a certain position in that family, the one who holds things together, the one whose version of events is trusted, and my crisis threatened that position without me even trying to. I was alone in a hospital, and I needed people to show up, and if people showed up for me, they were showing up outside of her orbit. So she neutralized it. She made my need the problem. She reframed my honesty as instability, my fear as manipulation, my one message as evidence of something wrong with me, rather than evidence of something wrong with how that family showed up. That's not a mystery. That's cause and effect. The choices she made led directly to the consequences she eventually faced, not punishment from some outside force, just the natural result of people finding out what she'd done and deciding what to do with that information. What saved me, and I mean that plainly, not dramatically, was Felix's willingness to think carefully when it would have been easier not to. He could have heard Pat's version and accepted it. Most people had. It takes something to say, wait, does this actually add up? Let me ask questions. Let me follow this. Let me be wrong if I have to be, but let me find out. That's not a small thing. It's the kind of thinking that requires you to value truth more than comfort, and a lot of people, in a lot of moments, quietly choose comfort. I've thought about what I want to pass on to our daughter from all of this. Not the bitterness, I don't have much of that left, but the lessons underneath it. I want her to understand that the way you treat people when it costs you something is the only real measurement of your character. Not the charity galas, not the board positions, not the reputation built over decades in a social circle. Those things can coexist with a profound unwillingness to drive through snow at midnight for someone who is scared and alone. Pat had all of those external markers of being a good person. She had none of the actual thing. I want her to be the kind of person who checks, who asks, is this true? Who doesn't let a comfortable story replace the inconvenient work of finding out. Felix did that. His mom, eventually, did that too. It required them to sit with their own discomfort, to admit they'd been wrong, to say the hard thing out loud. That's what clear thinking looks like when it actually matters. And I want her to know that when things break, and they will break, in ways you don't see coming, what carries you through isn't certainty. It's the decision, made quietly and repeatedly, to keep going anyway. I didn't know how that night would end. I didn't know how that night would end. I didn't know what Pat was doing. I just knew I had to stay until I had information, and then I had to drive home, and then I had to do the next thing. That's not heroism, that's just persistence. But it's the kind that compounds over time into something solid. You don't find out who people are when life is easy. You find out at 11:47 on a February night, in a waiting room in Halifax, when showing up would have been inconvenient. And you find out who you are in the same moment.